Hey, good evening, internet world. Tonight I wanted to talk about a episode of a podcast, or should I say a concept that came out from an episode of a podcast that I listened to years and years and years ago. It was the Tim Ferriss show when he had Debbie Millman on as a guest. And Debbie Millman, if you don't know, is a world-renowned graphic designer. At one point, kind of, I think her resume or the headlines was that at one point in her career, something like 25% of logos that you would see in the grocery store were were logos that she had designed. So she was a titan in her field of graphic design. And Tim Ferriss, if you don't know, was I don't know what he did prior to kind of going into the podcasting realm, and he wrote a couple books, The 4-Hour Work Week, etc., etc. So he was actually one of the first podcasts that I really got into and listened to, because he had on a bunch of really interesting different guests and was, I thought, a pretty good interviewer. And so I wanted to mention this episode in particular because it's one that I find myself referring back to in conversations year over year. Anytime I get into a particular conversation with someone, I find myself referring back to this episode and saying either, hey, you should listen to this episode, or you should do this exercise, which is in the episode, which is what the main point of this video is. So in this episode, he's interviewing Debbie about her life and career and how she went through school and entered into the job market and found her way as a graphic designer. And I don't remember all the specifics, and I, like most of these videos, didn't go back and do a huge refresher, but I just sent the podcast off again to another close person in my life with the timestamp of, hey, this is when that exercise that she talks about is explained. And so while I had it open, I listened to the exercise again. And again, I find this to be really relevant when you're talking about knowing what you want out of life, or really where I find it most useful is when I'm confronted, or when I am talking to people in my life who are confronted with kind of either a fork in the road or sort of a crisis of identity or purpose, or any and all of the above that we all run into from time to time, where we're going, I feel like I'm a ship that's sort of lost its rudder. I feel like I don't have a destination on the map that I'm shooting towards, or hey, I've got these kind of two big decisions, or a few possibilities of different ways I want to go, but I'm just not quite sure. And I find myself referring them again to this exercise that's explained in this podcast. And the exercise is called either 5-year or 10-year, but let's just say a 10-year plan for a remarkable life. And in this episode, Debbie explains a writing exercise that a professor had given her while I believe she was in graduate school. And the essential premise is to describe a day in your life from start to finish, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, in grueling detail. And depending on where you're at, you can either do 5, or if you're young, do 10 years. When I did the exercise a few years ago, I did a 10-year plan for a remarkable life because I felt like I had a lot of time on the clock, and I definitely still do. So the exercise is a simple one, but it's just what I explained, which is, hey, it's 10 years from now, and then the only additional requirements is that there's no limitations on resources. You're not allowed to limit your imagination whatsoever. The point is to dream as big as you possibly can about if you are living that remarkable life that you would want to be living, What does it look like from start to finish? And I will link the episode of the podcast. I'll timestamp it. It's about an hour 30 into the episode that she describes this exercise, and she lays it out in a great way. You wake up in the morning. What's the first thing you do? Are you drinking coffee or tea? And what kind of clothes are you wearing? What kind of house do you wake up in? Who are you living with? What are the things you're worried about? What are the things you care about? What are the things you're excited about? What's the first thing you do in the morning? What's after that? What kind of job are you working in? What kind of activities are you participating in? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she said that she eventually became a professor or a teacher of, I believe, graphic design of some sort. And she gave this exercise to her students as well, and said that she would get emails from former students, 10 years later, and people who had really put some time and energy into this exercise, that would say, wow, this is so eerie. All of these things that I wrote down are coming true. And one key aspect that she mentions is the more effort you put into it, the more detail, the more granular you get, the more you really just put your heart onto the page, the more it eerily will start to materialize. And so, again, this is something I always refer back to, and a caveat, or just a way I think of it, is it's not like it's some magical potion, some magical routine that, hey, as long as I write something into existence, it'll materialize, and the law of attraction will make it so. So I wouldn't put it in that light, but I do think there is something to, hey, if you don't have any image or picture of what your ideal life or what your remarkable life might look like, well, how are you ever going to get there, right? If you don't have a destination on the map, how are you going to navigate to it? So I always think of this again with friends or family or whoever who are at a fork in the road, because I feel like it makes these near-term decisions a lot easier when you've got that long range in mind. Because when you lose sight of the long range destination and you get caught up in what's right in front of you, I think it's easy to feel like you lose traction, or for it to become unclear, but that the moment you step back and go, okay, where do I eventually want to be? What is that destination I'm driving towards? Well, a lot of times I would like to think that it helps clear up these near-term crises or decisions or dilemmas or whatever you want to call them, because ultimately it becomes clear, hey, this one route, it may be the more scenic route, but it's hedging me more towards the direction, or it's falling more in line with the image that I'm holding in my mind of where I want to be years and years from now. And so I did this exercise a few years ago. Unfortunately, I lost the the composition book that it was stored in, but I remember some key feelings or thoughts, images that I put down in that first go around, and I have felt, and I do feel like I am veering closer and closer to that image that I set down on paper years ago. I don't feel like I'm there yet, and maybe it's one of those things where maybe I'll never fully materialize the remarkable life that I would otherwise put down on paper, because then that'll hopefully always give me something to strive for and to achieve, and et cetera, et cetera. But all that being said, even I recently figured, hey, it's been a few years, I lost my first version, let me put it down on paper again. So I've gone through a portion of the exercise again, and I will probably revisit that and try and finish out and have a full day on paper, so that I'm practicing what I preach and hopefully getting something valuable out of it myself. So anyway, as usual, I have found a long-winded way to turn a otherwise brief topic into 10 minutes of me rambling on and on. But that being said, I do feel like this is an important one. It's something I constantly revisit, constantly recommend to friends. So I figured, boom, if I just get it on this video, put the link in it, put the timestamp in it, the next time it comes up, I'll just say, here's the exact thing that's on my mind. I'm going to send you the video of me explaining it so that it's right there for you and you can listen to it at your convenience rather than having to listen to me yap and yap. So I appreciate anyone who comes across this video. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if there's any life-changing or life improvement ideas or concepts or exercises you've come across that have made an impact on your life and your world. So all that being said, again, I appreciate anyone who has come across this content, and yeah, hope you have a great evening. I'll catch you guys tomorrow.